Hey, how's it going everybody? In this video, we're gonna learn forms in HTML. So let's get started.
And if you wouldn't mind, please help me out by smashing the like and subscribe button.
An HTML form is like a digital paper that lets you type and send information to a web page. Like it has boxes, buttons, and other things where you can write or choose whatever you want to share, and once you have done, you can click a button and that's gonna send the information to a backend language such as JavaScript or PHP. So to add a form in HTML, we have to use the form tag. So we can write it by writing an angle bracket and then writing form and closing it with another one. And within our form tag, we can add another tag which is called the input tag. So add an angle bracket and then write input and close it with another one. Now depending on the user input, we can change the type of the input. So for example, let's say we want our user to put their username to our input. So we can change the type of our input to text. So to do that, we can write our type attribute and set it to text. There we go, and now in our HTML document, we can now see we have a text field where we can write something. So I think we should probably let our users know that what kind of thing we want them to write in our input. So we can add a label tag for it. So we can write an angle bracket and then we can write label and we can close it with another angle bracket. And within our label tag, we can write some text. What about we write something like username? There we go, and now we have a label which says username and we have a text field. So there's a way to link the label and the input together. So we can do it by coming to our first label tag and add a for attribute. And then what we have to do is come to our input tag and then give it a unique ID. And let's set the ID to what about my text. There we go, and now here for the for attribute, we can copy the ID what we have put in our input and paste it inside. There we go, and two features of using the for attribute is if we click username, you can see that this text input is already selected. And it is also helpful for screen readers as well. So to finish up a form, we have to add two more things. First, we have to add a submit button. So we can do it by adding a normal button and setting the type of the button to submit. And if we want to add some text in our button, we can write it inside the button text. So let's write something like submit. There we go, and now we have a submit button right here. And now the last thing we have to do is come to our first form tag and add another attribute which is called the action attribute. So basically what the action button does is it sends the form to a backend language such as JavaScript or PHP. But in this video, as we're gonna focus on the structures of forms, we'll be writing some dummy names. So what about we write something like action.php. There we go, and now there is another optional thing that you can add to your document, which is a reset button. So what a reset button does is it resets the form. So we can add a reset button by adding a normal button at first and setting the type of it to reset. And we should probably write something like reset inside. There we go, and now we have a reset button right here. So now let's test our form. Now if we write something like code dude maybe and click submit, so it says cannot get action.php, and of course it won't work because we don't have any file named action.php. And let's click the reset button and see what happens. There we go, and now we can see our text is gone. Now let's dive a little deeper into HTML forms. Now within our input tag, we can add an attribute. So this is called a placeholder attribute. So basically a placeholder is like a sample text that is gonna be shown inside our input, and this is used to guide the user. So let's write something like John Smith. And here in our web page, we can see John Smith as our placeholder. And it's somewhat faded, and if we start writing something, it's gonna disappear. So placeholders are some pretty cool things. Now let's learn another type of input. So let's say we want our user to give us an email. So as we're trying to get an input, we're gonna use the input tag this time again. But here we have to change the type from text to email. So there's a small difference between the normal text type and an email type. We'll be looking at that in a minute. But first of all, let's add a label as well. And inside we can write email. And in our input, we can set a unique ID. Let's write my email. And inside our for attribute in the label, we can write the ID of the input, which is my email. And now if we come back to our web page, we can now see we have our username and email tab. But we can see this is kind of messed up. So to fix this, what we can do is put each of the label and input in a div tag. So let's add our div tag and drag our first label and input inside it. There we go, and now we can do the same thing with the second one as well. There we go, and now our website is looking much better. So let's see what is the difference between the normal text field and an email text field. So here in our email input, if we write some invalid email and then try to click submit, we get a pop-up message that says that this should include an @. But now if we change this to a valid email such as example@gmail.com and then click our submit button, it's gonna take us to the action.php, but it's not gonna work because we don't have any file name like that. So this is a good feature of using the type email when we're trying to receive an email from our user. So next one we're gonna learn is the password form input. So we can copy one of these divs and paste it here and tweak a couple of things. So at first we can change the type email to password. Then we can also change the label to password. And we cannot forget the ID as well. Let's change it to my password. And we gotta change the form attribute as well. There we go. And the feature of using the password is when we write something, it will be automatically hidden. So that is an easy way to add password text fields in our web page. Up next, let's learn another HTML form input. So this is gonna be the number form input. So I just pasted the previous div we copied. And now I can change the type to number. And let's change the label as well. And also the IDs. So the feature of it is we can type any number and we can also use these buttons to go up and down. So we can also add a couple of other things too. So let's say we want our maximum number limit to be a specific number. So to do that, we can add an attribute which is called a max attribute, and we can set it to whatever the number is. So let's go for 100. And now if we go to our web page and write 100 and try to go upper, we can see we can no longer go up. So by using the similar method, we can also add a min, which stands for minimum number. So let's say we want to set it to 0. And here in our document, if we try to go below 0, we cannot do it. Now let's see how to add date inputs. So we can paste the previous div. And now from here, we can change the type from email to date. And we can change the label and IDs. There we go. And now in our document, we can see we have a date input. So here we can click this button and we can choose dates from here. So that's an easy way to add calendar dates to our web page. So the next input we're gonna learn is the radio buttons. So radio buttons are commonly used when we want our user to choose only one option. For example, let's ask our user to give their gender. So first of all, let's add our input tag and change the type to radio. There we go. And let's add a label for this radio button. So we can write our label tag. And inside we can write male, and we can set a unique ID for the radio button, and we can take this ID and copy this and paste it inside our for. So let's add another gender which is going to be female. So we can copy the whole thing and paste it again. Now we can change the label to female and change the ID to something else. Let's say we want to write female. And here in our web page we can now see we have two radio buttons for male and female. So there's a problem with this. We can now select both male and female. So we definitely don't want our users to select both of them. So to fix this and let the user to only choose one, we have to set the name for our two radio inputs to an identical name. So we can add our name attribute and let's set it to something like radio. Now we can copy this name and paste this inside our second radio input. And there we go. And now in our web page, we can now see our problem is now fixed. So now what we can do is add a label for the whole radio buttons. So let's add our label and we can get rid of the for. And inside we can write gender. And now finally we can put the whole thing inside another div tag. And now we have a working radio button right here. So the last input we're gonna learn is the drop down select menu. So when there is a lot of options to choose from, we can use this drop-down select menu. So we can add our drop-down menu by writing select, and here we can get rid of this. And inside our select tag, we can add another tag, which is going to be the option tag. And now from here, we can add our option. So let's give our user 3 options of 3 different programming languages. So first, let's write HTML. Then we can copy this and paste it a couple times. And now we can change the languages to maybe PHP and lastly to JavaScript. There we go. And now we can see we have a value attribute for each of the options. So we're going to set the value for each of them to a different one. So let's set the first one to 01, the second one to 02, and the last one to 03. And then we can also add a label for the whole select. And let's write language in it. And we should probably get rid of the for. There we go. And finally, we can put the whole thing inside a div tag. There we go. And now if we come back to our web page and click on the drop down menu, we can see we have our PHP and JavaScript. So let's say from our drop down menu, we want our PHP to be selected instead of HTML. So what we can do is come to our second option, which has PHP, and add an attribute which is called a selected attribute. And now in our web page, we can now see our PHP is selected instead of HTML. So in conclusion, by using the form in HTML, we can set up different types of inputs, and by a press of a single button, we can send all of the information to a backend language such as JavaScript or PHP.
So that's it for today's video. If you liked it and want to appreciate my effort, you can click the like button and subscribe if you think HTML is fun.